Retired pastor at Queen Street United Methodist Church here in downtown Kinston, North Carolina. Welcome to our weekly Bible study. We're going to be going through the bottom part of chapter 17 today and get through it. Now, I think this is an interesting section, given that we are coming up upon our own inauguration day, and people have incredible expectations one way or the other. So let's take a look at what their expectations were back in the Old Testament. Okay, let's pick it up at verse 14. When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me. You may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. Now, this is kind of interesting. This is not a, in some respects, it's a standard way of looking at kings, and in some ways it's not. Okay? Every king in history has claimed that the Lord, your God, has chosen him. Okay? The way this thing breezes through is kind of interesting too, because you look at all the controversy that came about when there was a transfer from the judges to a monarch. The people were clamoring for a monarch because during the time of judges, everything was going to hell in a handbasket. There was total chaos out there, and the judges were corrupt. Judges were established under Moses, but by the time you start looking for a monarch, the judges are more like warlords than they are judges. They're tribal warlords, essentially. And, they're not really looking after the people. They're not following the laws. They've become laws unto themselves, which warlords tend to be. And so there was a transition, and it was not smooth between Samuel and Saul. I don't know if you remember the great discourse that Samuel ostensibly had with the Lord, that the people were clamoring for a monarch, and Samuel said, this just isn't right. And the Lord said, well, it's not your fault. Oddly enough, in that conversation that Samuel recorded, it's not your fault. It's the people. I just can't do anything with them. So what are you going to do? I'll give him a king. We'll see what happens with the king. And Samuel goes down a whole litany of things that the king is going to do that the people aren't going to like, which, by the way, was not very different from what the people were experiencing with the judges. So anyway, if you want an argument against a monarch, which I love, that's probably the only good thing that I heard out of Samuel, was his description of what a king is like. And it's the reason we got rid of them. And then all of a sudden you got this thing in Deuteronomy, which is not terribly adverse to monarchies, oddly enough. When you get into the land and you get settled, you're going to want a king. So I'll pick one for you. It's not like, well, this is a terrible transition from judges. It's not God isn't saying, well, if you want a king, then you're not looking at a theocracy. You're looking at having some king instead of your God that you follow. Like under Moses and stuff, everything was about God. Now we want a king, like you had in the book of Samuel. But this thing just says, oh, you want a king? Okay, I'll get one for you, and I'll pick it out. And look at some of the standards that God has for a king. One of your own community you may set as king over you. You are not permitted to put a foreigner over you who is not of your own community. Well, we still have that in our law. We can't have a president who is not native born. Okay? Even so, he must not acquire many horses for himself, or return the people to Egypt in order to acquire more horses, since the Lord has said, you must never return that way again. What is this thing about horses? Okay, what do you need? Why would the king need a lot of horses?
An army.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're putting together an army and your army is based on horses, then generally speaking, you're oriented toward attack. You have horses for cavalry, and they're the ones who do incursions into enemy territory. If you want an example of a horse-oriented army, take a look at Genghis Khan. Because everything that Genghis Khan did, he did with cavalry, with horses. Okay? Not many foot soldiers. So what you're looking at is a very mobile force. You're not looking at a defensive army. You're not looking at one that's trying to preserve your territory. You're looking at one that's out to expand your territory. Okay? So God says, if you're going to have an army, it ought to be to defend the land, not to expand it. He must not acquire many wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away. Also silver and gold he must not acquire in great quantity for himself. Well, lately we've had kings that already have acquired a good deal of silver and gold. They don't need to acquire more. So, the king is not allowed to use his office to enrich himself. This is a flaw we may have to look at in our own system. It's amazing how people sometimes go into public office not so rich and come out extremely rich. I don't know how that happens. You know, I know the salaries are not supposed to be terribly exceptional for the work that they're supposed to be doing anyway. But somehow, I don't know what happens. They just seem to acquire things along the way, you know. So you're supposed to have a king who is one of your own community. Now, this is an interesting thing because this is not a matter of heredity. You can't have a king. You don't necessarily have to have a king who is a descendant of Moses or Aaron. You don't have a king who is a descendant of Joshua. We're not looking at a lineage thing here. We're just looking at somebody who is grassroots, comes out of the general population. Okay? And that's one of the things that we did pick up on. That whoever we pick as a leader is somebody who's supposed to come out of our population. One of the reasons why there is a limit, there are a few limitations on who we can pick as a president, but one of the limitations is age. And I think our limitation is age 35. And the reason why it was age 35 is that while we may pick somebody who is the son of a president, by age 35, they've made their own mark for themselves. You're not going to have child presidents. You're going to have somebody who by age 35 has established their own reputation. Okay? I can think of some reputations we'd rather not have for president, for offspring. But what they're trying to do is say, in our country, you have to be a grown person and establish who you are before you can be picked as a president in our country. They didn't want child kings. They didn't want child monarchs. Okay. When he has taken the throne as king of his kingdom, he shall have a copy of this law written for him in the presence of the Levitical priests. It shall remain with him, and he shall read it in all the days of his life, so that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, diligently observing all the words of this law and these statutes, neither exalting himself above other members of the community, nor turning aside from the commandment either to the right or to the left, so that his descendants may reign long over his kingdom in Israel. So what they're saying is that you may have a monarch, but the monarch is going to be a constitutional monarch. The king is not above the law. And we really didn't have an establishment of that principle until the Magna Carta. There had, once there was a Magna Carta, that's the first time in history of monarchs that a king became accountable to the law. Okay, the principle that we have is that whoever our leader is, they have to be accountable to the Constitution of the United States. We don't swear allegiance, in the military and in most offices where you have to swear something in order to assume that office. You have to first say that you support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I wish they would put in something like, I'll support and defend the Constitution of the United States in spite of myself,
But our leaders
Because I'm supposed
apparently are
to.
above the law.
They have been acting that way.
We don't come under the same jurisdiction as they do.
Well, by constitutional
And it seems
law,
to me they should be held more accountable.
well, that's something that I think we need to look at. Like, for instance, Congress can pass laws and exempt themselves from it. I don't see any reason why that should happen. Having been in intelligence work, I know that the people that's served under me had been required to do things that were in violation of the Constitution by presidential edict. And they knew at that time that what was happening was not constitutional. The Patriot Act that we enacted after 9/11 is incredibly flawed. And the Constitution is constantly being violated by agencies because of the Patriot Act. They have carte blanche to monitor people. We were never allowed to monitor. They can do it without a warrant. And I know that given the complexity and the speed of communication today, that intelligence agencies and law enforcement have to be incredibly nimble in order to keep up with this sort of thing. But there have been abuses for political purposes that had nothing to do with, it really had nothing to do with anybody breaking the law or anything like that. They've gone beyond what they were supposed to do in the
It's a
law.
fine line, though. There's a line because
Yes.
the world is not what it used to be.
No, it isn't.
The terrorists and these people coming in, law enforcement, in my opinion, has got to have some leeway to act quickly. Can't go get a judge to swear out a warrant every time they feel something's going on. And you can abuse it, of course you can, but still, you got to be able to react to things going on in today's world.
The realm of communication today is incredibly different from the realm of communication when I was in the business. Terrorists are using video games to communicate. Lots of predators, child predators, use video games to communicate with children, and they think they're just playing with another teenager, and they're not. And bad things happen as a result of that. It's really difficult. And you're right, Van. The lines have had to become finer if an agency is going to be in any way effective. But the problem is that when you thin the line and somebody sees an advantage politically to cross that line, then too often that line has been crossed. Now, I'm saying that has been going on since the 1960s. That is nothing new. And they've done it without the Patriot Act, and they've done it, I think, much more blatantly in violation of the law, but they haven't been impeached for it. But yeah, presidents that you might have admired did things that they should not have done. Okay? The problem is that this is a very nasty world, and politicians can take advantage and use that as an excuse for all kinds of aberrant behavior. They just do. Now, when you look at this section of Deuteronomy and you take it in the context of King Josiah, okay? This section of chapter 17 is directed specifically at King Solomon. King Solomon was a pagan. He was the son of a pagan, and this whole thing about don't acquire too much gold, well, guess who did? Don't get too many horses. Guess who had massive cavalry? Don't have too many wives. Who could that be? You know, today we're just looking at mistresses. I mean, to have all these wives, you know, it's just, you know, who did that? Solomon did. And why did you not want the king to have too many wives, even if he could afford them? What was the reason why you didn't want the king to have too many wives?
Well, they persuaded them to worship and do the things that they did.
Well, yes, there's that, and
He'd be distracted, wouldn't he?
you would think.
They didn't have to have wives to be distracted.
True that. No, the reason why you didn't want to have too many wives was that marriages were contracts. So King Solomon had contracts with pagan nations all around him. So what happened was that Solomon had treaty arrangements with neighboring countries. Okay? If another country has a treaty arrangement with you, they have an embassy in your capital. What do their embassies look like? They look like pagan temples. If you're going to have an embassy in your capital from a pagan country, they're going to have a pagan temple in your capital. And so Solomon populated Jerusalem and the surrounding area with all kinds of pagan temples. And Josiah went about destroying them. So it wasn't a matter of, well, it's not a good thing for somebody to have too many wives. This is political and religious. So these criticisms that you see here are specifically designed against Solomon, whom Josiah blamed for bringing paganism into the country.
It's amazing to me that, like Solomon and these kings, I mean, in my opinion, they were much closer to God than we are now, from the standpoint that God would talk through prophets and so forth. And yet they would never, well, like Solomon, he asked God for wisdom, and he wanted to be smart and everything, and then yet he went off and did all these pagan things. And I might have done the same thing, but it just seems that so many of these kings were so corrupt.
Yes.
Yet they were so much, in my opinion, closer to God, or God was closer to them in those days than we are now. And,
Well, That's not so.
Well, it just seems,
It just seems that way. And you know why it does? This is why it does. People who are literate and able to write are expensive. And if you are a king, you're going to commission writers. And the writings that you commissioned might just end up in your Bible. You're not going to find a king, too many kings. David was an exception to a degree. David was one of the very few monarchs that admitted a flaw. Saul admitted a flaw. Okay? I wouldn't fault him for the flaw. I would consider his flaw to be not a sin at all. But in the context of his culture and Solomon on biting at his heels, he had second thought. Saul did not have a tremendous amount of self-confidence. And he was susceptible. Okay? David had too much self-confidence. And every once in a while, he got zinged for it. But you don't find too many kings anywhere that are at all critical of themselves. If they're going to be critical, they're going to be critical of their predecessors, as in this case.
So they weren't as close to God as they wanted it.
They weren't any closer to God than anybody we've ever elected.
we know back, if you read, and then again, if you believe what you read, I mean, God talks to these, like David, and he speaks to them and tells them what he wants.
Yeah,
And
that's
he
what they wrote.
expects what they wrote. But you know, if you start going down that path, then how much of this is actually true? Is any of it true?
I think all of it needs to be questioned. I think all of it needs to be questioned. Doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means that it needs to be questioned. Now, if God was talking to kings and giving them guidance, what we should draw from that is that it may be possible for God to talk to me and give me guidance. Okay? The guidance that God is giving me isn't the same as the guidance that God was giving these kings. But the principle that God speaks to us is in relationship with us. That's a valid premise that we can take from this. Okay? Every king that wanted to do something that was at all controversial will always tell people that God told him to do that. It's much harder, in our society, it's much harder for a president to get away with that. I think if a president came out and told the population, God told me to do this, okay, what is there, an Article 52 or something people would be looking at? We don't take it for granted that God speaks to our president any more than God speaks to us. Okay? But at the same time, we have had presidents that have referred the people to God's guidance. Washington did that. You know, Lincoln did that. Even President Trump has done that. And Obama has done that. And, you know, refer to the people to be prayerful and to listen to what the Lord has to say. We've had presidents who are just as corrupt as all get out. Bring that president. They're listening to me now. But they've made that statement to the people, which is not an invalid statement. That's something that we should do. And God might tell us to go elect somebody else, you know. But if somebody comes out and says that I have this special connection between me and the Lord, that's monarchs. We don't play that. We challenge that. Okay? And we should. And we should. We should challenge that. We should challenge whenever somebody claims a divine authority. That needs to be looked at.
By anyone?
Preachers especially.
That's what I'm referring to, but I didn't say it.
I'm just saying. Because I'm into business. Okay? And one of the things you got to watch out for is when I know that the Lord spoke to me and got me into this business in spite of myself. Okay? But when somebody is claiming a divine authority that might have to do with their authority over you, watch out.
Right, because what's between you and God is between you and God.
Yes. Yeah, most of what God tells me is you better straighten up, you know. So, but I'm concerned. You've seen this with televangelists all the time, where they'll claim a divine authority to ask you for money. They'll claim a divine authority to make them immune to prosecution. You'll see them claim all kinds of things with the divine authority. Anytime somebody claims a divine authority, what do they have authority over, and how's that supposed to affect me? And I would question it, because it's so easy to corrupt that kind of thing. Now, what Josiah is saying is that we don't want that kind of king. We want somebody who came from the community. We want somebody who's not a foreigner. We want somebody who is not in there to enrich themselves or to kowtow to other nations. Okay? We want a king who is not going to amass an army and get us into wars we don't need to be involved in. And we certainly don't want a king who's going to make nice with Egypt and betray us all back to Egypt again. So that's the kind of thing that Josiah is warning against in Deuteronomy. But I think it's really interesting that this little thing gets in here. Because right now, I mean, I'm watching the news, and it's just the same thing over and over. I can't wait till, you know. And people were saying the same thing before the last inauguration. So people have all kinds of expectations one way or the other. We are not going to be completely satisfied with what comes out of all this, one way or the other, okay? So I just, you know, things might improve. Hopefully they will. Everybody has that expectation every time we come around to these inaugurations. But it ain't necessarily so. And I think it's very important for us to always be attentive to what's happening in our country and to stay in touch with the people who say they represent us.
But how could these people back in these days, you know, when a king is telling you this is what I'll do or whatever, they don't have the media.
That's right.
The king has the media.
Sources to tell them, hey, this guy's not for real. He's filling you up with a bunch of bull.
Yeah, that's right.
We have options to hear different people's opinions about stuff today, where they did today, good or bad.
Yes.
Maybe if these people had options back in those days, they would not have glorified, well, I don't know if they did, but a king maybe could not have convinced them that he was the person. But God chose that king, remember?
I think if you want to study some of this sort of thing, a really good case study would be Joseph Goebbels. He was a master. He was probably the best propagandist that ever was in all history. And he had a couple of things going for him. One of them was that he was in power. And the other was that nobody could oppose him and live.
I've never heard of it.
Goebbels,
Goebbels? You haven't heard of Goebbels?
he was number two.
Number 2 under Hitler.
Okay.
Yeah. Joseph Goebbels was the one who legitimized the annihilation of the Jews. Joseph Goebbels You know, it got to a point finally in 1945 where people began to think maybe he wasn't telling the truth.
But see
You
how long
think?
it took?
Yes, it did take that long. You know, when I was in, well, after Desert Storm, we had Iraqi freedom, and there was a guy called Baghdad Bob. You all remember him saying that the Americans are not in Baghdad. In the meantime, we're taking over the Baghdad airport. Baghdad. I've got a tape of Baghdad Bob spewing all of this. Hey, listen, we've had a bunch of Baghdad Bobs in the last several years in this country, and they've been in mainstream
Well, the
media.
Vietnam War.
Yeah.
How that was just,
It's
nobody
just-
here had a clue
Yeah.
how bad it was for a long time, I
Yeah,
don't think.
yeah, but after a while, it's wait a minute.
Right.
You know, there's always that wait a minute moment.
Yeah, but it takes a long time for us to get to that wait a minute moment.
Unfortunately, but in this country, at least when we get to that point, we can say, enough.
Thank goodness.
Yes. In other countries, you don't have that option.
That's true.
You don't. I mean, there's not even free speech in Canada. They don't have free speech in Canada. Right next
Did they
door.
not before the prime minister now? Who was the prime minister now?
Trudeau.
Before him, did they not?
They had more,
Right.
okay? But in Great Britain, they don't have free speech. They don't have.
We have free speech.
We have a constitution that says we have free speech.
Well, there's a difference.
Yes, but some people have found that maybe they don't have free speech. There have been a lot of people who decided that it's better to keep their mouths shut because of retaliation, you know? I've been kind of targeted for some of that myself. I know what it's like. But when they want you to shut up, they find ways to do that.
Who are you saying they?
The
Is that
government
in the United States?
in the United States, yes. Yeah.
Or in any career, any organization. If you're a minister or if you're a whatever, I mean, they'll find ways to make you.
Well, you think, I hope I'm not stepping on those toes, but think about pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. Yeah, what happened during COVID?
Well, even before that, what's the drug? I want to say oxycodone, but that's not it. You know,
Yeah, they were saying,
They were
yeah.
so quiet about.
Yes.
They, even their salespeople that tried.
Yeah.
It happens.
And look how many people they got addicted to that.
Right.
You
Right,
know?
because they were quiet.
Yeah, and
Because
some,
money
yes.
was more important than the health of the people.
And so was the money from the lobbyist.
True.
Money makes the world go around.
Money.
Corrupt.
I would like to
I was
think.
just quoting a song.
I know, it's true.
It does.
It depends on the world.
Unfortunately.
It depends on the world you live in, but money don't buy you everything. I mean,
No,
you
it
can
doesn't.
you can
It doesn't buy
outspend
you.
somebody in a
Players.
campaign.
Certainly doing that.
Well, anyway, I thought this one section in chapter 17 is worth the whole book. So,
But thank you for asking that question.
okay, I will not be here.
I appreciate.
I will not be here next week.
You want?
No, I'll be in Disneyland
Oh, well, good for you.
You mean world or land?
World.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, Disney World. Yeah, at least he thinks he owns it. But
I think we're here already.
yeah. Anyway, I'm glad that most of the stuff over there is fantasy. But
It makes you
anyway.
escape the real world.
But if you want to get together and talk about what we talked about today, come on back and have a good class, okay? And God bless you all. See you in a couple of weeks.
Have a good time.
That's the plan.